The October morning mist clung to the hills surrounding Cedar Ridge like a shroud, and Dr. Catherine Kate Sullivan felt its chill seep through her wool coat. As she stood at the edge of the town that had once been her home, 5 years had passed since she'd driven down the same road in the opposite direction, her medical practice destroyed, her reputation in ruins, and her heart broken by a community that had turned its back on her when she needed them most. Now, at 42, Kate had returned not by choice, but by necessity. The letter in her purse from Dr. Margaret Hayes, the town's aging physician, had been both a plea and an opportunity. Kate, I'm retiring next month and Cedar Ridge needs a doctor. I know what happened between you and this town, but people are more important than pride. The clinic is yours if you want it. Kate's hands tightened on the steering wheel of her Honda Accord as she took in the familiar sights of Main Street. Murphy's General Store still occupied the corner building, though it looked more weathered than she remembered. The old movie theater had been converted into an antique shop, and several storefronts stood empty. Signs of a small town struggling to survive in an economy that favored bigger cities. But it was still Cedar Ridge, still the place where she'd grown up, attended medical school, and married David Sullivan fresh out of her residency. It was also the place where David had died in a farming accident, and where the subsequent malpractice lawsuit had destroyed everything she'd worked to build. Kate parked in front of the Cedar Ridge Medical Clinic, a modest brick building that sat between the post office and Milner's hardware store. Dr. Hayes had given her the keys and assured her that the building was ready for occupancy, though she'd warned that winning back the community's trust would be a longer process. The clinic's interior was exactly as Kate remembered it. The same green vinyl chairs in the waiting room, the same outdated magazines on the coffee table, the same antiseptic smell that had once been as comforting as perfume. But now it felt like stepping into a museum of her former life, a place where dreams had lived and died. Dr. Sullivan, Kate turned to find a woman in her 30s standing in the doorway, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and her scrubs suggesting she was a nurse. The woman's expression was cautious but not unfriendly. I'm Jenny Morrison, the woman said, extending her hand. I'll be working with you if you decide to stay. Dr. Hayes asked me to help you get settled. Kate shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the direct way Jenny met her eyes. Thank you. I appreciate any help you can offer. I have to be honest with you, Jenny said as they walked through the clinic together. There are people in this town who aren't happy about your return, but there are also people who remember what kind of doctor you were before everything happened. Kate nodded, having expected as much. What's the current situation in terms of medical care for the community? Dr. Hayes has been handling everything alone since Dr. Martinez retired 3 years ago. She's 71 and exhausted. The nearest hospital is 45 minutes away, and for anything serious, people have been driving to Billings. We've lost 2 people in the last year who might have been saved if we had better emergency care available locally. The weight of that responsibility settled on Kate's shoulders like a familiar burden. This was why she'd become a doctor in the first place, not for money or prestige, but because small communities like Cedar Ridge needed advocates, needed someone willing to fight for their health and well-being. What about you? Kate asked as they examined the updated equipment Dr. Hayes had installed. What's your story? Jenny's expression softened slightly. I grew up here, went to nursing school in Bozeman, came back 5 years ago when my dad got sick. I stayed after he passed because Dr. Hayes needed help and because this place is home, you know? Kate did know. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and humiliation of her departure, Cedar Ridge still felt like home to her too. That was both the blessing and the curse of small-town life. The connections ran deeper than reason, deeper than hurt. They were interrupted by the clinic's front door chimming as someone entered. Kate looked up to see a tall man in a sheriff's uniform standing in the waiting room, his expression unreadable as he took in her presence. Sheriff Morrison, Jenny said, and Kate immediately understood the family connection. Kate, this is my brother-in-law, Tom Morrison. Kate had known Tom Morrison when they were both teenagers, though they'd run in different circles. He'd been a star athlete who'd gone into law enforcement after high school. While she'd been focused on her studies and dreams of medical school, he looked older now. His dark hair touched with gray at the temples, and there were lines around. His eyes that spoke of responsibility and worry. "Dr. Sullivan," Tom said, his tone carefully neutral. "I heard you might be coming back." "Sheriff Morrison," Kate replied, matching his formal tone. "I hope my return won't cause any problems for your department." Something flickered in Tom's eyes, surprise, maybe, at her direct approach. "As long as you're here legally and practicing medicine competently, it's not my concern who you are or what happened in the past." It was a diplomatic answer, but Kate sensed an underlying tension. She was about to respond when Tom's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff Morrison, we need you at the Riverside construction site. We've got a serious accident." Tom's expression immediately shifted to professional alertness. "On my way," he responded, then looked at Kate. "Dr. Sullivan, I don't suppose you'd be willing to look at an injured worker. Dr. Hayes is in Billings for the day, and it'll take an ambulance at least 20 minutes to get out there." Kate didn't hesitate. "Of course, Jenny, do we have a portable emergency kit?" "Already grabbing it," Jenny said, moving toward a supply closet with practiced efficiency. The drive to the construction site took them through the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, past farms and ranch land that Kate remembered from her childhood. Tom led the way in his patrol car while Kate and Jenny followed, the emergency kit and portable oxygen tank secured in the back of Kate's Honda. "He's testing you," Jenny said as they drove. "Tom, I mean, this is his way of seeing what kind of doctor you really are." "What do you think?" Kate asked. "I think he's worried about his community and his family, and he's trying to figure out if you're going to help or hurt." Jenny glanced at Kate's profile. "For what it's worth, I remember how you used to care for people. That's not something that just disappears." The construction site was chaos when they arrived. Workers stood in a tight circle around someone. On the ground, their faces grim with concern. Tom was already taking charge, directing people to step back and give them room to work. Kate knelt beside the injured man, a worker in his 20s who was conscious, but clearly in significant pain. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, suggesting a compound fracture, and there was blood seeping through his jeans. "What's your name?" Kate asked, her voice calm and reassuring as she began her assessment. "Danny." The young man gasped. "Danny Rodriguez. Is it bad, Doc? I'm going to take good care of you." "Danny," Kate said, her hands moving with practiced competence as she checked his pulse and breathing. "Jenny, I need you to start in 4. Normal saline. Wide open, and let's get some oxygen on him." As Kate worked to stabilize Danny's leg and control the bleeding, she was aware of the circle of workers watching her every move. She knew that word of this moment would spread through Cedar Ridge within hours. How the doctor who'd been driven out in disgrace had handled her first emergency back in town. "You're doing great, Danny," Kate said as she carefully splinted his leg. "We're going to get you to the hospital, and you're going to be fine." The ambulance arrived just as Kate was finishing her initial treatment. She gave a thorough report to the paramedics, ensuring they understood the extent of Danny's injuries and the treatment she'd provided. "Nice work, Doc," the lead paramedic said as they loaded Danny into the ambulance. "Clean splint job. Good the 4th placement. You probably saved his leg." As the ambulance pulled away, Kate found herself facing the construction crew's supervisor, a gruff man in his 50s who was looking at her with obvious gratitude. "Thank you, Doc," he said simply. "Danny's a good kid. Got a wife and baby. At home. You did good." The workers nodded their agreement, and Kate felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't even realized was tight. This was why she'd become a doctor. Moments like this, when skill and compassion could make a real difference in someone's life. Tom Morrison approached as she was cleaning up her equipment. "That was well done," he said quietly. "Professional. Competent. Danny Rodriguez is lucky you were here." "I was just doing my job," Kate replied. "No," Tom said, meeting her eyes. "You were doing more than that. You were proving something." As they drove back to town, Kate found herself thinking about the morning's events. She returned to Cedar Ridge expecting hostility and suspicion, and while those elements were certainly present, she'd also found something else, the possibility of redemption. of proving that she was still the doctor she'd always been, regardless of what had happened in the past. But she also knew that one emergency call didn't erase 5 years of absence, or the circumstances that had driven her away. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as she tried to rebuild not just her practice, but her place in a community that had once rejected her. That evening, as Kate sat in the small apartment above the clinic that Dr. Hayes had arranged for her, she pulled out her phone and called her sister in Seattle. "How did it go?" Sarah asked without preamble. "Better than expected," Kate admitted. "I treated an injured construction worker today. The sheriff was there, and he seemed cautiously optimistic about my return." "That's progress. It's a start," Kate corrected. "But Sarah, I keep thinking about David, about what happened. What if I can't handle it? What if being back here brings up too much?" "Kate, you've spent 5 years running from what happened here. Maybe it's time to stop running and start healing." After they hung up, Kate stood at her window looking out at Main Street, where a few businesses still had their lights on and the occasional car moved slowly through the quiet streets. Tomorrow she would officially reopen the clinic, and the real work of rebuilding her life would begin. She thought about Danny Rodriguez, about the trust in his eyes when she'd told him he was going to be okay. She thought about Jenny Morrison's willingness to work with her despite the town's mixed feelings about her return. And she thought about Tom Morrison's measured assessment that she was proving something. Maybe she was. Maybe returning to Cedar Ridge wasn't just about providing medical care to an underserved community. Maybe it was about proving to herself that she was still the person she'd been before tragedy and scandal had derailed her life. Outside her window, the streetlights illuminated the quiet main street of the town that had shaped her, rejected her, and now, tentatively, was welcoming her back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and perhaps new chances to heal wounds that had been festering for far too long. For tonight, though, it was enough to be home. Kate's first official week back at the Cedar Ridge Medical Clinic brought a steady stream of patients, though she couldn't shake the feeling that many of them were coming as much out of curiosity as medical necessity. There was Mrs. Henderson, with her chronic arthritis, who spent more time asking questions about Kate's time away than discussing her joint pain. Young Tyler Murphy came in with what his mother insisted was a severe cough, though Kate suspected it was more about the Murphy family wanting to assess the returning doctor than any real health concern. But there were also genuine cases that reminded Kate why she'd become a physician in the first place. She treated a rancher's infected wound that had been festering for weeks because he'd been driving to Billings for medical care and kept putting off the trip. She diagnosed diabetes in a woman who'd been attributing her fatigue to getting older, and she provided prenatal care for a young mother who'd had to travel hours for her previous appointments. "Word's getting around that you know what you're doing," Jenny observed on Thursday afternoon as they finished with their last patient of the day. Mrs. Garcia told half the Hispanic community that you speak better Spanish than Dr. Hayes ever did. Kate smiled as she updated patient files. "Medical Spanish was a requirement in my residency. It's good to use it again. There's something else," Jenny said, her tone becoming more serious. "Tom mentioned that you might want to know. There's been some talk about you at city council meetings." Kate looked up from her paperwork. "What kind of talk?" "Some people think the town shouldn't welcome you back after what happened with the Brennan lawsuit. Others are saying we need a doctor more than we need to hold grudges." Jenny leaned against the counter. "But Kate, I think you should know, Marcus Brennan is still in town. He never left after David's accident." The name hit Kate like a physical blow. Marcus Brennan, whose wife had died in the farming accident that also killed David, had sued Kate for malpractice, claiming she'd been negligent in her emergency treatment of both victims. The lawsuit had dragged on for 2 years, ultimately being dismissed, but not before destroying Kate's reputation and driving her out of town. "How is he?" Kate asked quietly. "Bitter, angry. He runs his farm and mostly keeps to himself, but he's made it clear that he doesn't want you here." Kate nodded, having expected this confrontation would come eventually. "What about his daughter?" "Sarah was about 10 when I left, 15 now. She's had some problems, acting out, getting into trouble." Tom's had to bring her home a few times for minor things, underage drinking, staying out past curfew. Marcus doesn't seem to know how to handle raising a teenage girl on his own. Before Kate could respond, the clinic's front door opened and Tom Morrison entered, his expression grim. But instead of his usual measured professionalism, there was something desperate in his eyes. "Kate, I need your help," he said without preamble. "It's my son." Kate immediately stood up. "What's wrong?" "Jake's been sick for 3 days. High fever, stomach pain, vomiting. I took him to the emergency room in Billings yesterday, but they said it was just a stomach bug and sent us home. But he's getting worse, and something doesn't feel right." Kate grabbed her medical bag. "Where is he?" "At home. My wife Carol is with him." Tom's voice cracked slightly. "Kate, he's only 8 years old, and I've never seen him this sick." The drive to Tom's house took them through the newer development on the east side of town, where families with young children had built modest homes with large yards. Tom's house was a split-level ranch with a well-maintained lawn and a basketball hoop in the driveway, the kind of place where a sheriff with a young family would feel safe and settled. Carol Morrison met them at the door, her face drawn with worry. She was a petite woman with kind eyes who worked as a teacher at the elementary school, and Kate remembered her as being one of the few people who'd remained friendly during the worst days of the lawsuit. "Thank you for coming," Carol said, leading them quickly through the house. "I know this is awkward, but Jake is so sick, and I'm scared." Jake Morrison was indeed very ill. The 8-year-old lay in his bed, flushed with fever and clearly in significant pain. When Kate gently pressed on his abdomen, he cried out and pulled away from her touch. "When did the abdominal pain start?" Kate asked, her hands moving expertly over the child's body as she conducted her examination. "Yesterday morning," Carol said. "At first we thought it was just part of the stomach bug, but it's gotten much worse." Kate's assessment revealed what she'd suspected from Tom's description. Classic signs of appendicitis that had been missed at the hospital. Jake's appendix was likely inflamed and possibly close to rupturing, which would turn a serious but treatable condition into a life-threatening emergency. "Tom, Carol, I need to be very direct with you," Kate said, keeping her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Jake has appendicitis. His appendix needs to be removed immediately, or it could rupture and cause a massive infection." Carol's face went white. "Are you sure?" The emergency room doctor said. Emergency room doctors see dozens of patients with stomach complaints every day. Kate interrupted gently. "Sometimes appendicitis can be tricky to diagnose, especially in children, but Jake has all the classic signs, and we can't afford to wait." Tom was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call for an ambulance." "No time," Kate said. "I'll ride with you to Billings. We need to get him to a surgeon within the hour." The 45-minute drive to Billings felt like the longest of Kate's life. She sat in the back seat with Jake, monitoring his vital signs and keeping him as comfortable as possible while Tom pushed his patrol car as fast as safety would allow. Carol held her son's hand and whispered reassurances, though Kate could see the fear in her eyes. "Dr. Sullivan," Jake whispered at one point, his young voice weak with pain. "Yes, sweetheart. Am I going to be okay?" Kate met his frightened eyes with all the confidence she could muster. "You're going to be fine." "Jake, I promise, at Billings General Hospital," Kate's reputation preceded her. The emergency room staff knew her from her previous work and immediately took her assessment seriously. Within 20 minutes, Jake was being prepped for surgery, and the surgeon confirmed what Kate had diagnosed: acute appendicitis requiring immediate removal. "You probably saved his life," Dr. Martinez, the surgeon, told Tom and Carol as they waited. Dr. Sullivan's diagnosis was spot on. Another few hours and the appendix would have ruptured. The surgery was successful, and Jake was moved to recovery with the assurance that he would make a full recovery. As Tom and Carol sat beside their son's bed, Tom looked up at Kate with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You don't need to thank me," Kate replied. "Any competent physician would have made the same diagnosis, but you did make it, and you dropped everything to help us even though." Tom trailed off, but Kate understood what he wasn't saying. Even though this town drove me out 5 years ago, Kate finished. Tom, I'm a doctor. When a child is sick, nothing else matters. Carol reached out and squeezed Kate's hand. I'm sorry, she said, tears in her eyes. For what people said about you, for how you were treated. I never believed. You were anything but a good doctor. The comment hit Kate harder than she'd expected, opening wounds she thought had healed. Thank you, she managed. As Kate prepared to drive back to Cedar Ridge, Tom walked her to her car. Kate, I need to say something, he said, his voice formal but not unfriendly. I was one of the people who thought you might have made mistakes. The night David and Ellen Brennan died, I let the lawsuit and the gossip color my judgment about what kind of doctor you were. Kate waited, sensing there was more. But tonight, watching you with Jake, seeing how you handled everything, I was wrong. Whatever happened that night 5 years ago, you're a damn good doctor. And this town is lucky to have you back. The drive home gave Kate time to process what had happened. She'd returned to Cedar Ridge hoping to quietly rebuild her practice and prove she could still be an effective physician. Instead, she'd found herself in the middle of a life-or-death situation involving the sheriff's son, forced to confront the very doubts about her competence that had driven her away. But she'd also discovered something important. Her instincts were still sharp, her skills still solid, and her commitment to her patients remained unshakable. Whatever had happened 5 years ago, whatever mistakes she might have made, she was still the doctor she'd trained to be. Back at the clinic, Kate found a message waiting on her answering machine. It was from Marcus Brennan, his voice tight, with controlled anger. Dr. Sullivan, I heard you're back in town. I want you to know that nothing's changed. Ellen is still dead, and I still hold you responsible. Stay away from my family, and stay away from me. Kate saved the message and sat in her darkened office, looking out at the quiet main street. She'd saved a child's life tonight, earned the grudging respect of a sheriff who'd once doubted her abilities, and been reminded by a grateful mother that some people had never stopped believing in her. But she'd also been forced to confront the reality that her return to Cedar Ridge meant facing people who blamed her for tragedy she couldn't change and mistakes she might or might not have made. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and inevitably, new confrontations with the past. But tonight, Jake Morrison was sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed, alive because Kate had trusted her training and acted decisively when it mattered most. For a doctor who'd spent 5 years doubting herself, that felt like a victory worth holding onto. Word of Jake Morrison's emergency surgery spread through Cedar Ridge with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. By the time Kate returned to the clinic the following Monday, she found a line of patients waiting outside the front door, some with genuine medical concerns and others clearly motivated by curiosity about the doctor who'd saved the sheriff's son. Looks like you've made an impression, Jenny observed as they prepared for what was obviously going to be a busy day. Kate nodded, though she felt the weight of new expectations settling on her shoulders. Success could be as challenging as failure in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. The morning brought a steady stream of patients, including several she hadn't seen since her return. Old Mrs. Patterson, who'd been her high school history teacher, came in for her blood pressure medication and spent 20 minutes catching Kate up on town gossip. Jerry Collins, who'd run the hardware store for 30 years, finally agreed to let Kate look at the persistent cough he'd been ignoring for months. Folks are saying, you diagnosed Jake Morrison's appendicitis when those big city doctors missed it, Jerry said as Kate listened to his lungs. That true, Jake had symptoms that suggested appendicitis, Kate replied diplomatically. Sometimes a fresh perspective can be helpful. Well, Tom Morrison's been telling anyone who'll listen that you saved his boy's life. That carries weight. In this town, Kate was writing Jerry a prescription for antibiotics when Jenny knocked on the examination room door. Kate, there's someone here to see you. Sarah Brennan. Kate's heart skipped. Sarah would be 15 now, the daughter of the man who'd sued her and the woman who'd died in the same accident that claimed David's life. Kate hadn't seen her since she was a 10-year-old at her mother's funeral. Send her in, Kate said quietly. The girl who entered the examination room was clearly Marcus Brennan's daughter. She had his dark hair and serious eyes. But there was something else in her expression, a defiance that spoke of teenage, rebellion, and unresolved grief. "Dr. Sullivan," Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. "I wanted to talk to you. Of course. Please, sit down." Kate gestured to the chair beside her desk. "How are you, Sarah? You've grown up since I last saw you." "I'm okay." Sarah's hands fidgeted with the strap of her backpack. "I heard what you did for Jake Morrison. People are saying you're a good doctor." Kate waited, sensing that Sarah hadn't come just to discuss her medical reputation. "My dad doesn't know I'm here," Sarah continued. "He'd be furious if he found out. But I had to ask you something." "What is it?" Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "Did my mom suffer when she died? I mean, did it hurt?" The question hit Kate like a physical blow. She'd been dreading this conversation for 5 years, had rehearsed it in her mind countless times. But actually facing Ellen Brennan's daughter made all her prepared answers seem inadequate. "Sarah, your mother's injuries were very severe," Kate said gently. "But from what I could determine, she lost consciousness quickly. I don't believe she experienced significant pain, but you couldn't save her." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, but it still made Kate's chest tighten. "No, I couldn't. Her injuries were too extensive. Neither I nor any other doctor could have saved her." Sarah nodded, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Dad blames you. He says if you'd been a better doctor, if you'd done things differently." "Your father is grieving," Kate said carefully. "Sometimes when we lose someone we love, we need someone to blame. It's easier than accepting that some things just happen, that some tragedies can't be prevented. But you blame yourself too, don't you?" The observation was so perceptive, so cutting, that Kate had to take a moment to compose herself. "Yes," she admitted, "I do blame myself sometimes, not because I made mistakes, but because I couldn't do more. Because being a doctor means carrying the weight of every patient you can't save." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I remember you from before. You used to come to my school to give talks about health and safety. You were always nice to kids. You were a good student," Kate remembered, "always asking thoughtful questions." "I want to be a doctor," Sarah said suddenly, "like you. I wanted to help people." Kate felt something shift in her chest, surprise, pride, and a deep sadness for this young woman who'd lost so much. "That's a wonderful goal, Sarah. You'd make an excellent doctor. Dad hates the idea. He says I'm being ridiculous, that I should focus on practical things. But I can't stop thinking about it." Before Kate could respond, the clinic's front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Kate knew without looking that Marcus Brennan had arrived. "Sarah." The voice was filled with fury and betrayal. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sarah's face went white, but she lifted her chin with the kind of courage that reminded Kate of her mother. "I came to talk to Dr. Sullivan." Marcus Brennan appeared in the doorway, and Kate was shocked by how much he'd aged in 5 years. The man she remembered had been robust and energetic, a successful farmer with a quick smile and an easy laugh. The Marcus standing before her now was gaunt and hollow-eyed, his hair prematurely gray and his face lined with bitterness. "Get away from my daughter," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. Kate stood slowly, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. "Marcus, Sarah came here on her own. She's not in any trouble." "I don't want to hear anything from you," Marcus snapped. "You've got some nerve coming back here, acting like nothing happened." "I'm not acting like nothing happened," Kate said quietly. "I think about Ellen every day. I think about that night, about whether there was anything else I could have done." "There was." Marcus's voice rose. "You could have tried harder. You could have cared more. You could have saved my wife." Sarah stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, stop it." "No, Sarah, you need to understand what this woman did. She let your mother die while she was saving her own husband. She made a choice about who was worth saving." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kate felt the familiar guilt and rage battle in her chest. Guilt because part of her wondered if Marcus was right. Rage because she knew he wasn't. "That's not what happened," Kate said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I worked on both patients simultaneously. I did everything I could for Ellen, just as I did everything I could for David." "But David was your husband," Marcus shot back. "Don't tell me that didn't matter." "Of course it mattered," Kate admitted. "David's death destroyed me, but it didn't affect my treatment of Ellen. I'm a doctor, Marcus. I took an oath to do no harm, to treat every patient with equal care and compassion." "Dad, please," Sarah said, stepping between them. "Dr. Sullivan was just answering my questions about Mom." She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Marcus looked at his daughter with an expression of betrayal that made Kate's heart ache. "You don't understand. Sarah, you were just a child when it happened. This woman just saved Jake Morrison's life," Sarah interrupted. "This woman has been helping people all week, taking care of everyone who comes to her. Maybe it's time to stop blaming her for something that wasn't her fault." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, while Sarah stood her ground, with a maturity that spoke of having grown up too fast. "You don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said finally, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "I know that Mom would be ashamed of how you've been acting," Sarah said quietly. "She would want you to forgive, to move on, to let me pursue my dreams instead of keeping me trapped in your anger." Marcus's face crumpled, and for a moment Kate saw not the bitter man he'd become, but the grieving husband he'd been 5 years ago. "I miss her so much," he whispered. "I miss her too," Sarah said, moving to hug her father. "But she's gone, Dad, and staying angry isn't going to bring her back." Kate watched the father and daughter hold each other, both of them crying for the woman they'd lost and the family that had been broken by tragedy. She wanted to leave, to give them privacy for their grief, but Marcus looked up at her with eyes that held something she hadn't seen in 5 years, not forgiveness, but the possibility of it. "I'm sorry," he said roughly, "for what I said, for how I said it. I can't let go of the anger, but maybe Sarah's right. Maybe it's time to try." Kate nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry too, Marcus, for your loss, for the pain this town has been through, for not being able to save her. Maybe," Marcus paused, struggling with words, "maybe we could talk sometime, really talk. Not about lawsuits or blame, but about that night, about what happened. I'd like that," Kate said, as father and daughter prepared to leave. Sarah turned back to Kate. "Dr. Sullivan, what you said about being a doctor, about carrying the weight of every patient you can't save, that doesn't scare me. I still want to help people." Kate smiled through her tears. "Then you will. Sarah, you'll make an excellent doctor." After they left, Kate sat alone in her office, emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. The confrontation she'd been dreading for 5 years had finally happened, and while it hadn't brought complete resolution, it had opened a door that had been locked for too long. Jenny appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee and a knowing look that sounded intense. "It was overdue," Kate said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Maybe now we can all start healing." "Tom Morrison called while you were talking to the Brennans," Jenny said. "Jake's coming home tomorrow, and Carol wants to know if you'll do the follow-up care." Kate nodded, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came with successful treatment. "Of course." As the afternoon wore on and the last patients of the day were seen, Kate reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. She'd returned to Cedar Ridge expecting to practice medicine quietly, to rebuild her life without drawing attention to herself. Instead, she'd been thrust into the center of the community's ongoing drama, forced to confront old enemies and new challenges. But she'd also rediscovered something she'd thought she'd lost, the sense of purpose that came from being exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, and undoubtedly new tests of her resolve to stay in Cedar Ridge. But tonight, as she locked up the clinic and climbed the stairs to her apartment, Kate Sullivan felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years, the quiet confidence that she was finally home. 3 months after Kate's return to Cedar Ridge, the first significant snowfall of winter blanketed the town in pristine white, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. Kate stood at the window of her clinic, watching Children build snowmen in the park across the street while their parents gathered in small groups, their conversation creating small clouds of vapor in the cold air. The clinic had become busier than she'd dared hope. Word of her diagnostic skills had spread beyond Cedar Ridge to neighboring communities, and she now had patients driving from as far as 50 miles away. More importantly, she'd become an accepted part of the community again, invited to town council meetings and asked to speak at the high school about careers in medicine. "Dr. Sullivan," Jenny's voice called from the front desk, "your 2 o'clock appointment is here." Kate turned from the window to see Marcus Brennan standing in the waiting room, his hat in his hands and his expression uncertain. Over the past months, they'd had several conversations about the night Ellen died, slowly working through the grief and anger that had divided them for 5 years. This was his first time coming to the clinic as an actual patient. "Marcus," Kate said, extending her hand in greeting, "thank you for coming in." "Well, Sarah's been after me for months to get this shoulder looked at," Marcus said, following Kate into an examination room. "She says if I'm going to keep farming, I need to take care of myself." Kate smiled as she began her examination. Sarah Brennan had become a regular volunteer at the clinic, helping with filing and basic patient care while preparing for her college applications. The girl's determination to become a doctor had never wavered, and Kate had written what she knew was a compelling recommendation letter for her pre-med applications. "Sarah's right about taking care of yourself," Kate said as she examined Marcus's shoulder. "This is a significant rotator cuff injury. How long have you been dealing with the pain?" "About 2 years," Marcus admitted. "Started after I took over all the heavy lifting Ellen used to help with." Kate nodded, understanding the subtext. Marcus had been trying to run the farm alone, pushing his body beyond its limits rather than asking for help or admitting he needed support. It was a common pattern among grieving spouses, throwing themselves into work to avoid confronting their loss. "We can fix this," Kate said confidently. "Physical therapy, some modifications to how you do certain tasks, and possibly a cortisone injection. You don't have to live with chronic pain, Marcus." "Sarah said you'd say that," Marcus replied with something that might have been a smile. "She's gotten pretty good at reading people since she started working here. She's going to make an exceptional doctor," Kate said as she wrote up a treatment plan. "Have you given any more thought to supporting her college applications?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I used to think I wanted her to stay close, take over the farm someday, but watching her here, seeing how she lights up when she talks about medicine, I can't stand in the way of that. It's hard to let our children follow their own paths," Kate observed, "but it's also one of the greatest gifts we can give them." After Marcus left with instructions for physical therapy and a follow-up appointment, Kate prepared for her final patient of the day. Jake Morrison had recovered completely from his appendectomy and was back to being a typical energetic 8-year-old. But Tom had scheduled a routine checkup to ease Carol's lingering anxiety about his health. "Dr. Kate," Jake called out as he bounded into the examination room, using the nickname he'd adopted after his surgery. "Guess what? I made the school basketball team." "That's wonderful, Jake," Kate said, genuinely delighted. "How's your scar healing?" "Wanna see?" Jake immediately started lifting his shirt, proud of the small mark that represented his survival. "Dad says it makes me look tough." Tom Morrison followed his son into the room, shaking his head with parental exasperation. "He's been showing that scar to anyone who'll look at it." "Battle scars are important," Kate said seriously to Jake. "They remind us that we're survivors." As Kate conducted Jake's examination, she was aware of Tom watching her with an expression she'd learned to recognize. Over the past months, the sheriff had become one of her strongest supporters in the community, often referring people to her clinic and publicly defending her competence. When old-timers brought up the past, "Everything looks perfect," Kate announced as Jake got dressed. "You're cleared for all activities, including basketball." "Yes," Jake pumped his fist in celebration. "Can I go tell Mom?" "Go ahead," Tom said. "I'll be out in a minute." After Jake left, Tom remained in the examination room, his expression thoughtful. "Something on your mind?" Kate asked. "Actually, yes. I wanted to talk to you about something." Tom paused, choosing his words carefully. Kate, the town council has been discussing the future of medical care in Cedar Ridge. Dr. Hayes' retirement left us in a vulnerable position, and your return has made us realize how much we need a strong medical presence here. Kate waited. Sensing there was more, we'd like to offer you a contract, Tom continued, not just for the clinic, but as the town's official medical officer. It would mean a guaranteed salary, health insurance, and funding for equipment upgrades. In return, you'd commit to staying in Cedar Ridge for at least 5 years. Kate felt her heart skip. Tom, that's an incredible offer. You've proven yourself. Kate, not just as a doctor, but as a member of this community. What happened? 5 years ago, that's in the past. We want you to stay. Before Kate could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Billings General Hospital, and she answered immediately. Recognizing the number as the emergency department, Dr. Sullivan, this is Dr. Martinez. We have a situation here that requires your expertise. A teenage girl was brought in with severe abdominal pain, but her father is refusing to allow surgery. He's demanding that only you treat her. The girl's name is Sarah Brennan. Kate's blood ran cold. I'll be right there. The drive to Billings was a blur of snow-covered roads and mounting anxiety. Tom had insisted on accompanying her, understanding that this case involved more than just medical treatment. It was about trust, redemption, and the complex relationships that defined small communities. At the hospital, they found Marcus Brennan pacing the waiting room, his face gray with worry and fear. When he saw Kate, relief flooded his features. Kate, thank God you're here, he said. They want to do surgery, but after what happened to Ellen, I can't sign the papers unless you're involved. Kate understood immediately. Marcus wasn't questioning the hospital's competence. He was seeking the reassurance that came from having someone he trusted oversee his daughter's care. Tell me what happened, Kate said gently. Sarah collapsed at school during basketball practice. Severe abdominal pain, fever, vomiting. They think it's her appendix, but Marcus's voice broke. I can't lose her too, Kate. I can't sign papers that might take away the only family I have left. Dr. Martinez approached them, his expression professional but sympathetic. Dr. Sullivan, thank you for coming. The patient presents with classic signs of acute appendicitis, possibly with perforation. We need to operate immediately. Kate quickly reviewed Sarah's chart and examination results, confirming the diagnosis. Marcus, Dr. Martinez is absolutely right. Sarah needs surgery now, and every minute we delay increases the risk of complications. But what if something goes wrong? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kate placed her hands on his shoulders, looking directly into his eyes. Marcus, I'm going to be in that operating room. I'm going to make sure Sarah gets the best possible care, but you have to trust us, and you have to trust me. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Kate could see him wrestling with 5 years of grief, anger, and fear. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but I want you with her every step of the way. The surgery was textbook perfect. Sarah's appendix was removed without complications, and she was moved to recovery with an excellent prognosis. As Kate sat with Marcus during the procedure, she realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The man who had blamed her for his wife's death was now trusting her with his daughter's life. Why? Kate asked quietly as they waited for Sarah to wake up. Why did you ask for me specifically? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because you saved Jake Morrison when other doctors missed his diagnosis. Because you've been taking care of this town for months without asking for credit or recognition. And because, he paused, struggling with the words, because I finally understand that Ellen's death wasn't your fault. You did everything you could that night, just like you did everything you could for Sarah today. When Sarah woke up, groggy but alert, the first thing she asked was whether she'd still be able to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. A little appendix scar isn't going to stop you from anything, Kate assured her. If anything, it'll help you understand your patients better. A week later, Kate stood before the Cedar Ridge Town Council, formally accepting their offer to become the town's medical officer. The contract represented more than just job security. It was a vote of confidence from a community that had once rejected her 5 years ago. I left this town believing I had failed as a doctor and as a person," Kate said to the assembled council members and community leaders. "Coming back wasn't easy, and rebuilding trust has been even harder. But this community has taught me that redemption is possible, that people can change, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most difficult circumstances." Sarah Brennan, now fully recovered from her surgery, sat in the front row beside her father. She was wearing a Cedar Ridge High School sweatshirt and had a letter of acceptance to the University of Montana's pre-med program in her hands. "Dr. Sullivan inspired me to become a doctor," Sarah said when invited to speak, "not just because of her medical skills, but because of how she handles adversity, how she puts patients first, and how she never gave up on this community even when we gave up on her." After the meeting, Kate walked through the snow-covered streets of Cedar Ridge, reflecting on the journey that had brought her back home. The town looked different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because her relationship with it had been transformed. Tom Morrison caught up with her as she reached the clinic. "Congratulations," he said. "Though I have to ask, are you happy with your decision to stay?" Kate looked up at the clinic sign, at the warm lights glowing in the windows of the building. That had become her sanctuary and her purpose. "5 years ago, I thought my life was over," she said. "I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, my husband, my career, my home. But coming back here taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's truly important. And what's that? That being a healer isn't just about medical knowledge or technical skills. It's about being present when people need you most, about building trust one patient at a time, and about understanding that redemption is possible for everyone, including yourself." As they stood together in the falling snow, Kate thought about all the lives that had intersected in the past months. Marcus Brennan, who had learned to channel his grief into support for his daughter's dreams. Sarah, who had found her calling in the place where her mother died. Jake Morrison, who carried a small scar that reminded him that good people would always fight for his life. And Tom, who had discovered that sometimes the best way to protect a community was to welcome back those who had been cast out. 6 months later, Dr. Catherine Sullivan married Sheriff Tom Morrison in a ceremony held in the town park, with Jake as ring bearer and Sarah as maid of honor. Marcus Brennan walked Kate down the aisle, having asked for the honor of giving away the woman who had helped him find his way back to forgiveness and hope. The wedding was attended by nearly the entire town, including many of the patients Kate had treated during her months of rebuilding trust and proving herself. In her wedding speech, Kate spoke about second chances and the way that love could grow in the most unexpected places. But it was Tom's words that brought tears to everyone's eyes. 5 years ago, this town lost a good doctor because we let fear and grief cloud our judgment. Today, we're not just welcoming her back, we're celebrating the fact that sometimes the best things in life come from the courage to start over. As Kate and Tom danced their first dance as husband and wife, snow began to fall again, blanketing Cedar Ridge in the kind of pristine white that promised new beginnings. In the crowd of well-wishers, Sarah Brennan stood beside her father, both of them smiling as they watched the woman who had saved not just their family, but their faith in forgiveness itself. The clinic would remain busy, the community would continue to face challenges, and there would always be more healing to do, both medical and emotional. But for tonight, in a small Montana town where everyone knew everyone else's story, love had triumphed over loss, and redemption had proven more powerful than resentment. Kate Sullivan had come home not just as a doctor, but as a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest prescription for a broken heart was the courage to open it again to the possibility of love, acceptance, and the endless potential for second chances.